Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Politics of Jesus podcast, where faith meets action and theology confronts the real world. I'm your co host, Reverend LaKesha Womack, strategist, minister, and believer that our faith must do more than comfort us, it must also challenge us to seek justice. Today's conversation takes us beyond our borders, but deep into our convictions. We're exploring Israel, Palestine, and the Black church, a topic that's often avoided in our pulpits, but essential to understanding the moral dimensions of liberation and oppression in our world today. I'm honored to be joined by my co host, theologian and prophetic scholar, Dr. Obery Hendricks, and our distinguished guest, Dr. Marc Lamont Hill, journalist, author, and activist who's been a leading voice for global justice and Palestinian freedom. Together, we'll unpack what churches often misunderstand about the modern Israel state, the history of the conflict, and how Christians and political Zionism shape the theology we practice. But most importantly, we'll ask, what should the Black church do? This isn't about taking sides, it's about telling the truth through the lens of our faith and justice. So let's get into it. Welcome to the show, guys.
Good to see y'all.
Hey.
Yes, thank you so much, Reverend LaKesha, and so glad to have here this evening my dear friend and colleague, Reverend. I was going to say Reverend Dr.
I'll take
it. Marc Lamont Hill, who is just such an important intellectual and political commentator, and he's been a long-time media commentator on all the major networks, and he's a professor at the CUNY grad school, and the author and editor of a number of books dealing with justice, dealing with racism and justice and classism in America. And one of his most recent books is on Palestine, entitled Except for Palestine. And he's been, I don't know, at least a decade, a major commentator on and advocate for Palestine and the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And we want to welcome you here tonight, my brother. So
Thank
good
you.
to have you. Thank you for making time. Your most recent book is on Except for Palestine. And you've been such a fervent commentator, one of our most articulate and fervent commentators. I know that you've kept me abreast of what's going on in Palestine. Let me ask you, brother, what initially piqued your interest in Palestine? I know you've been there a number of times. Give us some sense of what brought you to that point.
That's a great question. And again, it's so wonderful and exciting to be here with you two. I respect you two so much. And as this podcast was birthed, I've been following it and paying attention and watching it grow. And I'm excited to be a part of it. And hopefully I can share some of it with the world, because everybody needs to know what y'all are up to, because this is so important. And the work that you all do on the ground is so important. My connection to Palestine begins at a pretty young age. Initially, it was less about Palestine and more about me trying to understand my place in the world and my location in the world. You know, I'm a student through the book of Malcolm X. I came to consciousness through Malcolm X. I came to consciousness through the teachings of the Nation of Islam and the 5% Nation, some of the Ansar Allah books, the Dr. York books, all of the kind of Black consciousness that was being raised in the 80s and 90s for me was shaping me. So it started with Malcolm, though. We know Malcolm makes 2 trips to the Middle East. You know, a lot of times people think about Malcolm in this kind of Disney story of, you know, bad Muslim goes to Mecca, sees white people, becomes good Muslim. And it's a far more interesting and complicated story than that. But in 1959, he makes his first trip. He makes his second trip in 1964. That also means he'd seen white people and white Muslims before. But you know, he's been to Gaza. Malcolm's been to Gaza. Malcolm's been to Jerusalem, both of which end up being really important spaces. And so Malcolm's trips there opened my eyes and raised questions for me. When we think about SNCC, when we think about SNCC after 1967, they published a newsletter in, I believe, July or August of 1967, which was right after what we call the 6 Day War, or the second major wave of conflict or battle, military struggle between this new state of Israel and the Palestinians and their Arab comrades. And so after 1967, the SNCC was saying, wait a minute, this is neo-colonialism. They use that language, neo-colonialism. So suddenly, for those of us who were thinking, as Malcolm instructed us to do, in an internationalist fashion, we were starting to connect dots. You know, Malcolm in 1964, in September of 1964, wrote a book called wrote an article in the Egyptian Gazette called On Zionist Logic.
Wow.
All of this stuff starts to matter. I mean, even as a student of Du Bois, you know, Du Bois was wrong on this issue, but Du Bois writes a really important piece in May of 1948. It was published as A Case for the Jews. But if you read the original essay, and I think Amherst has the archive, it's called Ethics and the Problem of Palestine. So Black people and Black leaders and Black thinkers have been wrestling with these issues and wrestling with these questions for a long time, sometimes on the right side of the issue, sometimes on the wrong side of the issue. But I would say from King forward, you know, we're starting to see major figures wrestle with this stuff. King didn't want to be aligned with the other preachers who were about to take an ad in the New York Times in the aftermath of the 6 Day War. You know, in 68, King didn't want any parts of this. King didn't want to return on a trip to the Holy Land. And finally, you know, King was one of those people who said, I believe that Israel has grown arrogant and unyielding. And so every January, when people trot him out as a Zionist, it's a misrepresentation of his legacy. It's a misrepresentation of his political vision. And if there's time, we can talk about that. But I was wrestling with all this stuff. And then on top of that, again, these organizations and these movements, we're talking about the Asiatic Black man.
Right.
You know, what does it mean to be an Asiatic Black man? What does it mean to think about ourselves in the context of a global political imaginary that includes Black and brown people? What does it mean I don't even like to think about political solidarity as much as I like to think about internationalism. Solidarity still feels like an act of like moral philanthropy, you know, as opposed to saying, I'm here with you. And my political analysis is such that I understand that the only way to dismantle these systems of oppression is if we see ourselves as part of a collective. As we see ourselves as part of the kind of strategic essentialism that says, yo, we are the same thing here and we're struggling against the same force. And so over time, that became the thing. The last piece of it, though, I think more immediately was in 2015 or 2014, Mike Brown is killed. And when Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, on the streets of Ferguson, one of the things you saw were people wearing keffiyeh. One of the things you heard were people saying "Free Palestine," Intifada, because at the same time that Mike Brown was killed in Ferguson, in what we call Ferguson Summer, a month earlier, there was a 51-day war, which now seems like nothing, but at the time it was a 51-day war, right? Operation Cast Lead came. Or Protective Edge, excuse me. Basically, there was a 51-day war of Israel waging war in Gaza. And so suddenly we were trying to stop this thing in Gaza in 2014. And we were trying to stop this thing in Ferguson and all around America in terms of police militarism in US. And there were these moments of solidarity. And one night when we were getting tear gas in Ferguson, and we were trying to resist. And I remember I was live tweeting on the ground from Canfield about not being able to see. And other people were saying that we couldn't see. There were other people in Ferguson, a sister named Miriam Barghouti, who lives in the West Bank, but was protesting what was happening in Gaza, was tweeting from Ferguson. And the Ferguson activists started tweeting to Black folk. The Gaza activists started tweeting to Black folk in Ferguson saying, here's how you clean your eyes out. Here's how you protect yourselves from military. Put the T-shirt around your head. don't stand close to the police because they can't tear gas you if they're too close to you because they'll tear gas them. So it was no longer a kind of symbolic solidarity. It was tactical and it was strategic. And then from there, we took a delegation. I was there. Some of the Ferguson activists were there. The Dream Defenders organized it. Shout out to Philip Agnew and Ahmed as well. Ahmed and Phil organizes. Ahmed is from Jerusalem, and the two of us, organized a delegation where we went there. Some of the founders of Black Lives Matter were there. All of them were there, and in doing that work, Ahmed Abusnaid and Philip Agnew, they set us on a different path, and we started having different conversations. And suddenly, the political agendas, the demands, the asks we had as organizations included justice for Palestine in concrete ways, and we saw the same thing on the other side. And so, from there, I've been more of a voice. I mean, the reason they asked me to go on the delegation was because I was arguing with Dershowitz on CNN at a moment where nobody was arguing about this stuff on CNN.
Right.
It was me and Peter Beinart, honestly. And we're up there fighting and struggling for this and trying to figure out how to get justice at home. And it started to make sense to me. Also, I'm an anthropologist, and I started doing ethnographic field work in Jerusalem. So I've spent the last now 10 years in Jerusalem, in East Jerusalem, looking at the Afro-Palestinian community in Jerusalem. I'm also finishing a film called Black in the Holy Land, which is looking at different Afro-descendant populations in the region, from Ethiopian Jews to asylum seekers from Eritrea to Jerusalemites. And I'm trying to tell that story, which is very much tied up in religion, it's very much tied up in culture, it's very much tied up in politics. And I'm trying to tell these stories of what it means to be Black around the diaspora. And historic Palestine is just one of those places, which kind of took me full circle to the back in the days when I was trying to understand what it meant to be the Asiatic Black man, maker, the owner, creator of the planet Earth, father of civilization, God of the universe. And so all those dots started to connect for me. And so my connection to Palestine is political, it's emotional, it's psychological, and it's academic.
Interesting. Wow. You mentioned Black population. Our first time in Israel, I've been there, I don't know, about 5-6 times, done 4 or 5 documentaries there. And my first time, I think, was the late 80s. And I ran into a brother outside of Jericho, right? Dark-skinned brother, darker than you. And and so, we were talking, young brother. And I said, so where are you from? He said, from here. I said, no. I said, well, I mean, where are your people from, man? I mean, what, your parents say, what? I said, we're from here. I said, well, no, where did they live before they were here? And he said, here. I'm like, oh, damn, the ugly American, man. But it was then that I realized that there is this Black indigenous community of color. Very, very important. Also noticed, I experienced a lot of racism in Jerusalem, man. And then when I went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and I know the Ethiopian, each denomination has their own little part of own little corner of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, man. Well, the Ethiopians are on the roof, man, right? They have a little cubby on the roof, man. Yeah. I'm like, this is bad. And then lastly, let me say, I was talking to one Palestinian brother. He was telling me, man, I was trying to understand, and he was very angry. And he said that Israelis had picked up some of his buddies and beat him up and dropped them from helicopters, right? Like, wow, man, this is much more serious than I realized. I just want to put this in before you go on. On that first trip, I was still on that first trip. So I'm walking down the street it was a study trip, and the professor's daughter I was with, she's a teenage girl. We're walking down in the old city, and I looked down an alley, man, and these Israeli soldiers, who we know look like they're 12 to 15 years old, they were rifle putting this brother on the ground. I mean, they were beating the hell out of him, man. So I said, what's going on? And they said, well, he refused to show his past. I'm saying past, apartheid's still happening. I'm saying, wow, man. And so I mean, and I know you can appreciate this, all that black folks going through, what kicked into me is, I can't just let them beat this brother to death, man. So I said to the young lady, go back and tell him where I am. So I started walking down the alley. I don't know what I was going to do, but I had my hands out so they could see that I would. And man, this guy turned around and came running me, the soldier with an M16, and put the gun in my head and got ready to pull the trigger. So I said, he's an American, don't shoot. So what I'm saying is, I saw firsthand the depth of their racism, the virulence of their racism, and how brutal they are way back then, man. So I know, I mean, and then it was even more virulent when you came, So I
in
mean,
some ways, what you saw was worse. It's different, because there's, obviously a lot happened in Palestine after 1993 and the Oslo Accords, which radically shifted not the intensity of the repression, but the way it looked. And I can talk about that, but I mean, you said a couple of things that were so powerful and so important. I mean, one, I had that same experience that you had in Jericho. When you see a black person, you're like, where are you from? And I had that same experience in Jerusalem when I first met a brother named Ali Jeddah. And what you come to find out is that Afro-Palestinians have been there for a very, very long time. And so part of what we have to do is dig into that history. I mean, part of it does come through legacies of slavery, but we're talking centuries. Part of it comes during the Arab resistance to the Zionist occupation or the Zionist settler colonial project. There were people who fought in what's called I know it in Arabic. I'm trying to think. It's the like the Arab Salvation Army. It was basically an army of it was a widespread army of people who came to help liberate or defend Palestine. Many were West African Muslims. They came on a path to do that. Partly to defend Masjid al-Aqsa, the Aqsa Mosque. The holiest mosque in Islam is in Mecca. The second is in Medina. The third is in Jerusalem. Right. And so right when you're at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, if you keep walking down that street and you hang a left, you'll see obviously the Western Wall if you keep going down. But before that is Haram al-Sharif. It is this beautiful, wonderful Aqsa compound, the compound of Aqsa Mosque, which is where the Afro-Palestinians live. The other part of it.
By the way, let me say I made salat in Aqsa.
Oh man,
yeah.
It's a beautiful place to make salat. It's stunning. And unfortunately, I've been in there in days where Israeli military forces come in and don't take their boots off, walk across the carpet, sound bomb the whole place. It's been terrifying to be in there at different moments. Also, there's a process in Islam that was more popular in the early part of the 20th century called Taqdish al-Hajj, where you would kind of want to Taqdish al-Hajj, which means like almost like purifying your pilgrimage. And so what they would do after going from Mecca to Medina, they would come back through Jerusalem. And many of the African Muslims were asked when they were there to stay, to be guardians of the of the mosque for a variety of reasons, some of which you could imagine. They perceived as big and strong and fearless, and some of them were bigger and stronger, and some of them were just black, and they were there. And at some point, the Jordanian Trust built under the leadership of Al-Hajj Amin al-Husseini, gave them they pay a symbolic fee every month, but they basically live there for free, and that's where the Afro-Palestinian community was kind of birthed there. Others, ones you saw in Jericho, are a little different. They've been there for a very long time. In fact, in my film, I asked the brother a very similar question. I said, "How long you been here?" And he said, "Where'd you come from?" And he's like, "I'm from here." And then when he asked his wife was like, "Tell him you're from." She named the town up the road. But they were saying that for thousands of years we've been here. We are here. And sometimes black people are illegible in the context of the Middle East, and they're illegible in the context of Islam. So it's important for them to do that reminding work. But it's also important that when you use that word racism, which I think is super important to use, that racism isn't reducible to skin color there, and this to the extent that the Ethiopians who are there are not on the same political side as the Afro-Palestinian in Jericho.
Right.
You know, because the thing that makes you racialized there, to use Ruth Wilson Gilmore's language, the thing that consigns you to premature death, the thing that makes you vulnerable to premature death in Palestine is being Palestinian, not having the skin color. Because the Ethiopians came, and when you came in the 1980s, it's a really interesting time, because Operation Moses is happening. And so in the mid 1980s, around 1985, 1986, you start to see this huge influx of Ethiopians who were airlifted from Ethiopia directly into Israel. Now the question is why? Well, obviously there's famine and there's war going on in Ethiopia, and so they brought them over. And the right of return in Israel, the right of return law, which was created in 1951, I believe, basically allows for any Jew anywhere in the world to be able to return. We're going to focus on that word return because it's an important word, to return home or to ascend. Aliyah is what it's called in Hebrew, and it's to ascend, right? So they're allowed to return home or to make Aliyah. And so many people made Aliyah before Israel was formed. Like the first waves happened in the 1800s, long before the rise of Nazi power. The first Aliyah happened. I don't mean to nerd out too much. Are we good?
Oh no, this is great.
Okay. Yeah. So the first Aliyah happens in 1882, and it's a wave of Eastern European Jews who are making their way into historic Palestine. The second wave happens around 1904, right up to 1914, the start of World War I. These are not religious people.
Right.
This is not a religious movement. Many were socialists. They were setting up kibbutzes there, and many were socialists, and they were trying to live off the land. It wasn't nearly as successful as they wanted, but this whole thing was happening. So the first waves of Jewish immigration was happening at a moment also where Theodore Herzl and others at the end of the 19th century,
who was an atheist, by the way,
right, is creating a kind of Zionist organization and creating this notion of a Jewish nationalism, which hadn't really existed before in this particular way.
Right.
To be Jewish in Morocco, you were still Moroccan. Right. To be Jewish in Egypt, you get what I'm saying, you're still Egyptian. Yeah. But suddenly, the whole notion of Jewish nationalism or Zionism at that moment was to say that Jews anywhere in the world are of a single nation.
Right.
And that nation now needed a national home. Now, initially, it was a national home, not a state, but a national home. And we saw the movement of people coming. The formation of the World Zionist Organization, which was then called just the Zionist Organization in 1897, creates a moment where suddenly there's a collective push, and they're trying to figure out where to go and how to do it. Historic Palestine, which was still ruled by the Ottomans until 1914, seemed like a place. Now, to be clear, they were looking at other places. They also looked at Uganda.
Yeah.
So it wasn't quite the divine call that it was later stated to be. It was, hey, we need a home. It was a classic colonial project.
Absolutely.
In fact, there was a department of colonization in Ottoman Palestine and in British Palestine. So the idea that it wasn't a colonizing adventure is new. That's some revisionism, right? This was very clearly a colonial project. I'm gonna tie this back to the Ethiopians in 1 second. Right, so they were making their aliyahs, they were coming, and it wasn't quite working out. There's a lot of interesting books and work we could talk about that sort of unpacks why it didn't work and what the next pivot was. But we started to then see after the World War I a whole shift in how power was operating. The Ottoman Empire had fallen. Suddenly, Europe was in control of the Middle East and Africa in ways that they weren't before. The Sykes-Picot Agreement was basically let's split up the Middle East. Let's divide it up. If you look at the Middle East, there's a reason why all the flags look the same or same colors.
It wasn't the Middle East at the time.
Right, it wasn't even the Middle East, right? The language, right? East of what? Middle of what? Right? That is a colonial referent. It was created by a British naval officer in 1902, I believe. So, but also when you look at the Middle East, all the regions are there. Someone literally took a ruler on the map and just drew lines. And said, I'm gonna take this, you take this, I'm gonna take this, you could do this. That's why oftentimes the lines are cut across ethnic, what would be natural ethnic and tribal divisions. So the Kurds are in Iraq and in Syria, but because of how nationalism works, we're supposed to say, oh, I'm an Iraqi now, or I'm a Syrian now. I was like, no, I'm a Kurd. You get what I'm saying? And so you divide it along people's families and people's. So all this is happening in the Middle East, and there's a scramble for the Middle East, just like there's a very classic scramble for Africa, right? And the British are in control of it. And the British are, and they created, as many European nations did, the British Mandate for Palestine. And what they effectively said is, yeah, we believe in democracy and self-governance and rule and all that Enlightenment BS, but y'all aren't ready. These Arabs are not ready for democracy. So we're going to, for a mandatory period, hold the land until they're ready for democracy. Some regular paternalistic colonizer talk. The British were able to control Palestine, but they didn't want to be in Palestine. They got what they call empire on the cheap. They allowed the land to be controlled, but they weren't physically there. So they allowed the Arab families to control it to a certain extent. If you go to Jerusalem, when you see the name Khalidi, like our dear brother Rashid Khalidi, when you see the Khalidis, the Husseinis, or the Nashashibis, those are the families that control Jerusalem, and they were kind of like the rulers of the land. And then around other parts, they said, okay, well, there's a Zionist movement coming in, and they want to control the land too. Ultimately, the Balfour Agreement is created in 1917, which gave the British allowed for Jews to have a national homeland there. The word Palestinian is not mentioned in there, even though it's majority Palestinian. Palestinians aren't even mentioned in this.
Except they were Palestinians. Even Ben Gurion and Golda Meir recognize them as Palestinians, right? Right.
And that's where that's super interesting too, right? So in the Balfour Declaration, which is only about 67 words long, I mean, it's a letter. It's literally just a letter saying, yeah, whatever, they can have the land. It wasn't to give a Jewish state, it was just to have a Jewish homeland, right? And it said without violating the religious civil rights of the present people. It didn't say the word Palestinian, but there absolutely, to your point, was a Palestinian national consciousness. The land had already been called Palestine long before, although it was often used to refer to the Jewish presence. And it connects obviously etymologically to this word Philistine. But the idea here was that, yeah, the Arab population who were Palestinian, had a Palestinian national identity and national consciousness, would be protected. But over time, what we saw was that they weren't. They were getting disenfranchised. They were getting dispossessed of their land as more and more waves of immigration happened. And these waves of immigration were being supported by the Jewish National Fund. They were being enabled through the British Empire. And the issue wasn't that Jews were in the land. There were always Jews in historic Palestine. There's an unyielding, uninterrupted Jewish presence in the land. They're Palestinian Jews, right? The issue wasn't
just Palestinian.
Right. That wasn't the issue. The issue was the dispossession of the indigenous people. And they wouldn't have cared if they came from China. They wouldn't care if they practiced Buddhism. The whole point was our land is being dispossessed. And so the struggles that we saw up into 1939 with the start of World War II was based on that. And at some point, the British said, enough immigration. This ain't working. And that's when they went to war against the British. And you saw the bombing of the King David Hotel and all these other things. And so it's a very tense thing. But over this time, the immigration didn't stop. And they understood that demographically, they needed a majority in order to hold on to this nascent, not just Jewish homeland, but Jewish state. And when we talk about sort of what it means to be a religious state, this is where it gets really complicated. But just let me say one more thing, because I know I'm talking a lot.
This is brilliant. Thank you.
So when this state is formed, it could only be formed with a majority of Jews, right? This is why between 1947 and 1949, you saw the expulsion of so many Palestinians. And in 1948, what Palestinians refer to as the Nakba, or the Great Catastrophe, is when 770,000 Palestinians were expelled from their homes and not allowed to return. And then they created a law, right, for invaders, which basically made it illegal for Palestinians to return to their own homes, despite the fact that it stands in contradiction and violation of international law. You cannot, and the whole point of World War II and the whole point of creating the nation state, ostensibly, was to prevent the conquest, to prevent the imperial model of saying, I won the war, your land is mine now. You had to respect the territorial integrity of people. You had to respect sovereignty. You had to respect the nation state. That was the idea. So now you had colonization through other means. And this is where it gets messy. So Palestinians were expelled at the same time that Jews were allowed to come from around the world, right? As they had been. They become from Eastern Europe. Now they come from Western Europe. Later on, you see more and more coming from the United States. You see the settlers coming in from like Brooklyn, for example, and Florida, all these sort of places. And if you watch the Aliyah footage, you see these people making Aliyah, and you see the grainy black and white footage.
Yeah.
So you get to the Ethiopians, they pictures it in color. They didn't bring them over for another 20 years, 30 years, not because they loved Ethiopians, but because it was another mechanism for sustaining the demographic integrity of the state. But when they come over, they're not received
right
the way the way the Ashkenazim were received, the Europeans, not the way the Sephardim were received. Some Arabs, also the Spanish, the what we call the from it'll come the Latinos. This was the word they were received, and it's kind of a hierarchy from Ashkenazi to Sephardim to the Mizraim, the Easterners, the Arabs, and then you had the Beta Israel, the Ethiopians. They came in, and they weren't even read as Jewish. Right. And this is really fascinating, right? Because they come in at a moment, at the same time, remember the Soviet Union has just fallen. So Russian Jews are coming at the same time. The Russian Jews are absorbed right into the community. The Ethiopian Jews were put in absorption centers. They were taught that they were told that they could not participate in certain rights. They couldn't live in certain places because the question was, are they Jewish? Because in Israel, because it's a Jewish state, the Department of Aliyah and the Department of Immigration are the same. And the Department of Aliyah and the Department of Immigration are run not by politicians and bureaucrats, but by the rabbinate. Yeah. And so the rabbinate is saying, are you legibly Jewish? Now, what's fascinating about this is that they've been disconnected from Judaism since the fall of the temple, since before the fall of the second temple. Right.
May I interject? The Beta Israel, called the philosophers, they are the oldest, longest existing practitioners of Judaism for centuries.
That's the thing. But because they were disconnected from after the fall of the temple, they practiced temple worship. Their practice precedes the formation of modern rabbinical Judaism.
Right.
And so, ironically, like you're right, they're the OGs. They're the original practitioners in terms of being told that their form of practice is somehow unacceptable when they're practicing a form of Judaism that precedes, as you brilliantly pointed out, the rabbinical Judaism, the rabbinical Judaism. And so when they have to do symbolic conversions, second circumcisions, it's some of it is largely symbolic, but it communicates a certain thing about, again, who's legibly Jewish, right? And over time, they have come to be included into Israeli society. I don't want to pretend that they're not, but they're often on the front lines. They often live in the poorest communities. They often get the worst education. When I was there, they were forming a Black Lives Matter movement because they were being killed by Israeli police. And when the Israeli police killed them, they said, "Well, we thought you were Palestinian." That was the explanation. And sadly, to a large part of the population, that's a reasonable answer. And so, it's the racial politics, which is what my next book is really unpacking some of the racial politics of Israel and this context in the context of even anti-Blackness, but not exclusively anti-Blackness, as we just talked about, right? Because when I'm riding through Jerusalem with my Afro-Palestinians and we get stopped at a checkpoint by an Ethiopian soldier, nobody's relieved.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
In fact, they're often more, as y'all know, a black cop. KRS-One talked about that, right? The black cop is often the worst one.
Yeah.
Right.
And so all that is happening at a moment where Israeli apartheid is digging in its heels. And that's what we're witnessing right now. And so even as you all talk about the church and we think about the church, part of it is about figuring out how we got to a point where this struggle has been understood or imagined as a religious struggle.
That's important.
You know.
So do you think that a large part of it is just like a misunderstanding of the current state of Israel versus what people read in the Bible? So it's like we have this imagined vision of Israel and not the realized vision, because, if we're honest, a lot of Americans do not leave America. And so they have not traveled abroad and seen the conditions and seen or had these experiences firsthand. And so they only rely on what they're being told or what the news is telling us is happening, which, as we know, is not always reality.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And there's a difference between, and also please unpack the difference between Israeli state and Israel, biblical Israel.
Yeah, that's such an important point. One, LaKesha, I think you raised the right question. I think you're being too generous. I don't think it's even about us misunderstanding. It's about people cynically muddying and confusing and conflating these things so that people will have the misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that we talked about the early formation of the early Zionist movement. Again, was a largely secular movement. That sometimes seized on sort of religious tropes and religious ideas. It doesn't mean that they weren't religious folk, and it doesn't mean that people didn't hold on to their beliefs. And I mean, if you go to any Passover Seder, you'll hear next year in Jerusalem, right? Next year in Jerusalem is a very commonly uttered a phrase, the idea of exile, the idea of being out in the world, right? How do I sing the Lord's song in a strange land? These ideas are crucial to faith traditions, right? This idea of being away, this idea of being in the wilderness. These things are all true, and it ain't just our Jewish brothers and sisters who have seized on these narratives. I mean, you can't be Black in America and not have some engagement with Exodus. That was Eddie Glaude's first brilliant book, right? There's always these relationships to the Exodus story have been used by Muslims, Christians, Jews. It's all part of the story, and it's all an important part of the story. That said, there is a moment where different religious organizations, different strands of even Judaism, are saying, "Hey, wait a minute. If we're making this if this is a religious argument, then we have to ask ourselves, how are we sort of biblically compelled to engage the question of Israel/Palestine, or really for them the question of Israel, right? For them, the return home is necessary, right? The debate is not whether Jews should ever return to biblical Israel, this land that was sort of, whether we talk Canaan, whether you call it Israel. The question wasn't whether we should return. The question for them, the debate, is whether this is the Israel we're returning to, and whether these are the proper conditions. There are, I mean, if you look at the Netori Karta, who are sort of a group of very conservative, they're the minority, but a very conservative strand of religious Jews, they say, yes, we should be doing it, but this ain't the time and that ain't the place. Right. But it works for the narrative, right? You mentioned David Ben Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, not religious man. Chaim Weizmann, the first president of Israel, and part of the what we call it's basically like what do they call it? It's basically like the more fundamentalist kind of Zionist in terms of political fundamentalism, right? It'll come to me in a second, but they also not him, Zev Jabotinsky, right? Him and Zev Jabotinsky, not religious people. Chaim Weizmann was a chemist, not a rabbi, right? This was not a religious movement of people trying to come back home for religious purposes.
Some of them were atheists. Some of them, we have to stress that. Some of them the earliest Zionists were atheists.
Yes.
The ones who wrote the earliest documents.
Yes. And that's the point. And so the embrace of religion in many ways was a cynical pull by this political strand. Again, I'm not denying the religious connection to Israel. I'm not denying the religious connection to the land or the sites or the architecture. All that is real, but that's not what this is about. Over time, that became the argument and that became the narrative. It's also important. The reason I gave that timeline of 1882 up to the first Aliyah was to show that the Zionist movement began long before Hitler rose to power. Because we often also argue that the formation of Israel was a necessary process because of the Holocaust. The Holocaust is an awful, awful moment in human history. It's one of the most atrocious acts of evil we've ever seen. And a response was needed to provide safety for Jewish people around the world. That's not, however, how the Zionist movement begins or why Israel was formed. That's simply just historically inaccurate. It's happened in our modern time. My dad's older than Israel. Like this isn't, and my mama too. Like this isn't something that we need to like. This isn't shrouded in mystery. We could be honest about sort of how these things came to be. Over time, though, this became very convenient, and it became attractive not just to Jews around the world who were looking for safety, not for religious practice, but for human safety. Actually, let me say one more thing about that, because the right of return isn't based on halakha. It's not based on Jewish law. Right. What makes you Jewish by halakha is much more narrow than what makes you Jewish by the Israeli state. And over time, they've expanded the right of return to allow more people. For example, it's matrilineal, right? Like my dad being Jewish doesn't make me Jewish. My mama being Jewish makes me Jewish.
Right.
But I can have right of return if my daddy's Jewish. Now, then what the logic was, well, and I agree with this logic to some extent, Hitler wasn't making those distinctions.
Right.
I was unsafe as a Jew, regardless of whether I was halakhically Jewish or not. And even when you look at like in Spain, during the, the Inquisition and such, even when people converted and they were conversos and they became something else, 3 generations later, if they found out you were Jewish or connected to Judaism, they were still killing you. Jew hate and anti-Jewish violence was not limited to Jewish law. So I understand that logic. There's a response to that, which is like, should Hitler be defining our Jewishness? But that's an internal Jewish debate that I'll let them have. Right. But my point is the state was never purely about religion. It was never a purely religious practice, but it became compelling. It was also compelling to somebody else, to Christians. There you go. Because first of all, particularly for these evangelicals, because for them, the fulfillment of prophecy, and they want Jesus to come back bad. They waiting on him.
Right.
And when he comes back, what are they expecting to do to Jews?
And that's the fascinating part, right? So the first thing is they want Jesus to come back, but Jesus can't come back until the Jews are returned to their homeland, i.e. Israel. And so by calling it Israel, by calling this state Israel and rebuilding Israel, not even within the territorial boundaries of what the kingdom of Israel was, they're all, but they're saying we're going to build Israel. And the Jews are returning home. They see that as a fulfillment of prophecy. So you have these evangelicals who are often anti-Semitic but love Israel because it allows them to fulfill the prophecy of Jesus coming back. Even though when Jesus comes back, he's not coming back to be ecumenical.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
He comes back, and if they don't convert Christianity, they remain Jews, they will die.
Yes. You're either forced to convert or get killed. What is more anti-Semitic a narrative for a Jew than that?
Right. Well, I just want to.
It must be said here that in the 19th, excuse me, Keisha, I'm sorry. It must be said here briefly that the earliest documents of the Zionists in the 1890s called for removal of all Palestinians from the land of Israel. That's the genesis of it. From the beginning, it was about removal of all of them. So Netanyahu, we'll get to him, in a moment. But he's still just functioning according to that same logic. It's always been about removing everyone.
Yes, there were two strands. Absolutely, there were 2 strands of Zionism. And my brain was locked. It was called. I said reform fundamentalist, but it was called. I just forgot it again. Gosh darn it. But revisionist Zionism. That's the word I keep looking for. Revisionist Zionism. The revisionist Zionism strand is the one that won. They were the ones who and Jabotinsky was the leader of it, who said, we got to get rid of these. Yes, it's their land. Yes, they're indigenous. But we got to get rid of them. And yes, they're going to fight back. Because nobody no people worth their salt would not fight back. And that's why we have to build the iron wall around them. Right. Yeah. And there's a very famous essay called The Iron Wall by Zev Jabotinsky. And part of what he's trying to do is make that case. He said, my attitude toward them is the same as toward all Arabs. It's indifference. Basically, like, I don't care what y'all got. I'm over here going to build this thing. And if y'all got to die, y'all got to die. Netanyahu is definitely of that lineage, as are most, actually all Israeli prime ministers, almost all of whom fought in war and actively engaged in acts of violence against Palestinians during that wave of struggle before Israel was actually formed. It's not the Israeli army, it comes from the Haganah, but there were also the Lehi. There are other strands of radical terrorism. Look at the bombing at the King David Hotel that happened because of how they approached this thing. But anyway, back to the church. They're going and they're saying, look, we need Jesus to come back, but we also need critical mass of support. That's why when you go to these HBCUs and you go to these black churches, and they often overlap church and HBCU, you see what? You see free trips to the Holy Land. You see people funding leadership, paying people. You go to Morehouse, you don't see nothing but people who want to be Dr. King. I remember being a freshman in Morehouse and seeing it's stunning what you see when you go there. By the end of freshman year, they're offering all of us trips to the Holy Land because they know many of us are going to be pastors, many of us are going to be political leaders, and they want us to have a particular story of Israel. Right. And so they fund us to go and see it, and that becomes part of our narrative. So that when we start preaching about good news and we start preaching about the return of Jesus and he coming back, they want us to associate that with the protection of Israel. And so that becomes how all of this connects in a very perverse way around religion and politics.
Yeah. And I think that that's so important. I love how you started the conversation talking about the voices of some of our civil rights heroes, because a lot of times, especially with everything that we're dealing with in society today, people are like, I can't afford to care about what's happening here as well as what's happening over there. But I think you've demonstrated that it is possible to have enough care for our situation as well as our brothers and sisters abroad. So what would you say to pastors who still embody that, who think that they don't have the capacity to care for both? Like, how is liberation globally attached to our liberation here?
Such a fascinating, it's a great question. It's a wonderful question. I hate that we have to ask that for pastors. I would think that pastors would need that kind of push to care about, the least of these, wherever they might be located geographically. These nation states, these flags, these passports, these IDs these are modern constructs. We're human beings. Right. We're part of a human family. And I would think that pastors of all people would be thinking a little less tribalistically in that way. But I think there's an argument here of moral responsibility. First thing I tell pastors is the United States funds Israel. Billions of dollars every year. Israel could not do what it does to the Palestinians for another 6 months if the United States put its foot down right now and turned the faucet off. It couldn't. We fund the money, we give the money, we fund the weapons, and we provide diplomatic protection because we're one of 5 nations with permanent presence on the UN Security Council, and the U.S. vetoes any attempt to hold Israel accountable. Even this peace agreement we just saw. I mean, it wasn't the international community holding Israel responsible. It was the United States and Israel brokering a deal that does nothing to undermine the maintenance of a system that allows countries to use genocide as a matter of policy, which is what Israel just did for the last 2 years. So there's we're not doing Palestinians a favor by staying in solidarity with them. It's our tax dollars.
Right.
And the people we keep voting for on both sides of the political aisle keep endorsing this.
Exactly. And Keisha raises that important point. It's a moral responsibility, and Mark, it is disgusting to me that you have these preachers who are so benighted, man, who don't read enough, the newspaper enough to realize our responsibility to stand against this genocide, man. But also, we've seen so much foolishness with Christian Zionism. There are so many black preachers who are supporting Israel because they're talking about, well, that they're the chosen people, and and God is for them. And what kills me is that even with the chosen people trope, the Bible says they're chosen to demonstrate justice and righteousness in the world. They're not chosen to be special. They're not even fulfilling their biblical responsibility as Jews. So I mean, how do we bridge this gap? And I'm glad Keisha raised this point. How do we bridge this gap, brother?
We always talk about political education, and political education, I think, can't be disconnected from the church.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of people out there until the last 5 years that thought that this was a religious fight.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not. It's a classic settler colonial struggle. But we had to educate the people of that. People thought that Israel was doing no wrong and the Palestinians were doing no right. But the more we put them cameras on, like, you know, like it's like King on the Pettus Bridge. The more we show the spectacle of violence, the more we can embrace and understand the truth. I think we need to be in these churches offering a different narrative. I think we need to be challenging it on biblical grounds as well. Like argue. And I remember years ago, Cornel West was doing this. It might have been with Andrew Stephenson. They were basically asking him how you debate someone with such a radically different worldview. And he said, we have to debate on their terms. He said, if you're debating a KKK member, show them in the Bible why this doesn't make sense. Because if they claim to be Baptist, show them in the text why this doesn't make sense. So if these preachers are making these claims, and a lot of these preachers making these claims don't have biblical degrees. They don't have the training. There's no way you could have a sophisticated read of the Bible and walk away with that interpretation.
Right.
I'm less interested in convincing the cynical preacher. I'm more interested in convincing the audience. Like when I used to debate Bill O'Reilly on Fox News, I never thought I'd convert Bill. I just thought the people watching might get some sense. Right. So we can engage that pastor, but most importantly, we need to create platforms like this one and spread it so that people can see the truth. They can see what historic Israel was, what ancient biblical Israel was, and see that ain't it. They can see what it means to be chosen and how that idea of chosen doesn't entitle you to a settler colonial project. Jews deserve the same safety and dignity and protection that everybody deserves, not more or not less. We need to talk about that, though, right? We need to actually show people the documents. We need to show people what's happening versus what is supposed to happen. And we also need to the extent that we can see what's happening, right? Engaged witnesses, Malcolm talked about, right? We need to see it. But when we go see it, we can't take the APAC tour. We can't take the Holy Land tour. If you want your church to see Palestine, call Grassroots Jerusalem. Like, I could give churches 50 people to call that could show them the thing, and not to advance my position, but to just see the whole thing. But when you walk through, and I've spent many a day, many a month sitting in East Jerusalem, sitting right in front of the Austrian hospice, because when you come down to the 7th station of the cross, when you walk down that street coming from Lionsgate, you see all these pilgrims. You see West African pilgrims in particular, but you see American church groups, and I watch them. They get led down. They see the stations of the cross. They see Jesus. He still ain't there. Right? They go to the tomb. He still ain't there. They're happy, relieved, and they keep walking, but they don't see any Palestinians. No. In fact, they're told, don't stop, don't shop, no, don't buy. Don't stop, don't look, don't buy. Excuse me. Don't stop, don't look, don't buy. So, and now they built a new gate on the other end called the Jaffa Gate, and the new gate and the Jaffa Gate, where you can walk through, see all the stuff, and never pass a Palestinian. And so, and then they'll take you. They won't take you to the West Bank. I mean, they'll take you to Bethlehem, the Manger Square. Right. And of course, you'll be in Northern Israel. You go to Nazareth.
Yeah, I've seen all those places.
And you know the tour. But and you'll see the Madonna scenes on the church in Nazareth, and you go to Manger Square and see but what you won't see is streets like Shuhada Street, where you can't even, Palestinians can't even walk down that street. You won't see Khalil where they have cages because the settlers are throwing rocks. They won't show you the checkpoints where children can't, have to go through the ritual humiliation of being swiped and patted and prodded all day, every day. They won't show you Gaza. They won't show you. We could go down a list of things you won't see. So we have to put a spotlight on that, either by going or through media that represent that. At the same time that we do the political education, at the same time that we do the religious education, so that people don't think to be a good Christian, you have to support the Israeli apartheid project. That would be like saying to be a good Muslim, I have to support the repression of women in Saudi Arabia, or the Abraham Accords. You know what I mean? Like, that's not what's happening. We have to tell the truth, and we have to tell it with critical acuity.
Yeah. Well, we could talk to you all evening about this subject because it's so informative, and I know our audience. Yes, we definitely need you to come back. But if you could give our audience just maybe 1 or 2 books that they can read to start their education, because as Dr. Hendricks always says, like, we don't read enough. So where would you encourage them to start this education?
That's a great question.
May I just add this before we close? I think it's important to talk about, at least for a few minutes, the implications of this accord that Trump has brokered, and whether it's real, what do you expect to come out of it? And as you talk about those books.
Yeah, I mean, the state of Israel has never honored a treaty or a peace agreement. I mean, there was a peace agreement 9 months ago.
Yeah.
There's no reason to believe it. The 20-point plan sounds good until you read it, right? Palestinians are barely represented in it. The Trump Board of Peace doesn't necessarily include Palestinian leadership. Even saying the Palestinians will be there. Oh, let me just back up. This was designed with no Palestinians there. The press conference, not a Palestinian in the room. This did not have Palestinian involvement. They're deciding what Palestinian leadership should be and who Palestinian leadership should be. They've made it so that Hamas can't be a player in the game. And they've made the Palestinian Authority kind of the moral high. But this is all smoke and mirrors. I mean, the Palestinian Authority emerged out of what? The PLO, which was the very group that they said were the terrorists that could never be talked to. They're very strategically deciding who's good, who's bad, who's a terrorist, who's not, who's worth talking to, and who's not. They create such a narrow boundary around what's in the interest of peace that any kind of Palestinian resistance will be seen as a disruption of the peace plan and therefore a violation of it. Any kind of resistance, any kind of, all of it.
It's designed to fail, in other words.
Exactly. They say that Israel would withdraw, but there's no date or target for withdrawal, and to a designated place. The designated place is back outside the perimeter of Gaza. The problem with that is because the argument Israel makes is we left Gaza in 05, into 05, beginning of 06. Palestinians can vote and have their own life, and they ruined it. What they don't say, and this talking point has been told by the left and the right. I remember Hillary Clinton gave the same talking point in her debate in 16. How do I put this? Palestinians have never had a moment of self-determination in Gaza or anywhere.
Not since the Nakba.
Yeah, even before the Nakba, if you think about it, right? If you think about these waves of immigration, it still wasn't self-determination because there was no state.
That's right.
And so they went from Ottoman control to British control to Israeli apartheid. No, and so it's a very tricky and messy thing that's happening here. That said, the agreement basically allows Israel to keep the control on the perimeter. So am I a sovereign nation if I can't have an airport? Am I a sovereign nation if you have the ability to control who goes in and who goes out? Am I a sovereign nation if I'm controlled by land, air, sea, population registry, aeromagnetic sphere, all those things? Because what they try to say is the Palestinians had self-determination from 05, 06, but that's what Israel's been doing. And now, in the name of security, they're doing it again, and not for a short amount of time, potentially forever. And that's the same thing that we saw in 1993 in the formation of the Oslo Accords, which was supposed to be a pathway to peace that had no firm dates, no penalties, nothing for not allowing that to happen. And so that's how we end up.
Wow.
Here, this is not a good agreement. And the work of Nora Etiquette, by the way, Nora Etiquette has broken this down brilliantly.
What's
her name is Nora, Noura Etiquette, Erakat. I love her analysis of some of this. Even just on YouTube, go check this out because it's happening in real time. But she breaks this down in a really granular way. But it's absolutely important. I like for someone who's starting on this topic to read The 100 Years War on Palestine by Rashid Khalidi.
Oh yes.
It's such an important book. I mean, I'm a nerd on this. So and then for those of you who are interested in his, I'm looking at my shelf here to see. This isn't my academic shelf, but I would say Tom Segru. Tom Segru has a book called One Palestine Complete. I believe it's called One Palestine Complete, and that tells the story of sort of how this whole thing happened from during the British mandatory period. Jews and Arabs under British mandate. So it's called One Palestine, Complete by Tom Segru. Tom Segev. That's why Tom Segev.
Yes, Segru is a civil rights.
Yeah, I'm getting my registered mixed. But Tom Segev, you absolutely read One Palestine Complete. Absolutely read the 100 Years for One Palestine. That'll give you that'll give the context. There's a million other books we can read, and I'm happy to provide a book list. Anything Rashid Khalidi writes, so you should read.
Absolutely.
But I would start there, and then if there's a specific topic people want, I'm happy to drill down. And I think I've read just about every book on the subject at this point, and so my brain is sort of log jammed with stuff, and so I want to think of something that will give the overview, and then if people want to think about this in different terms or in different contexts, I think there's a lot of ways to go.
Well, I think that's the perfect segue. Where can people find you online? So if they want to connect with you and learn more about you and your work, where can they find you?
I have a website, and I'm on these different platforms. But what I'd love people to do is go to my Patreon. If you go to patreon.com, Marc Lamont Hill official, you'll see information about me, but you'll also see my content, and it's also a mechanism for supporting the work that I do. Since I was fired from CNN for speaking out about this issue, I've tried to be as independent and grassroots as possible with my media production. And so the night school program I do on YouTube, all that stuff comes from my pocket and from my house, right where I'm sitting right now. And so if people went to Patreon, they can find the content, and they can also find ways to support me as we do this work, independent from corporate media.
Wonderful. I love that. And Dr. Hendricks, where can they find you online?
Well, my podcast, the Obery Hendricks Jr.substack.com. I've written on some things on Palestine, and I'm a ferocious critic of this sick piece of trash who sits in the Oval Office. I can't cuss. I shouldn't, but I sure feel like it. Yeah, but I'd like to say that I think I can speak for both of us. I want to thank you so much, Mark, for bringing such a brilliant and important analysis. Raising the consciousness of folk. You've said some things, man. That I've read Rashid Khalidi and some other stuff in your stuff, but I learned a lot today, and so this is important, and we're going to promote this as much as we can, raise a consciousness, particularly in the church community, when you have so many preachers who have a captive audience, at least once a week, millions upon millions of people.
Yes.
Maybe we can have some kind of impact to bring some measure of justice in this against this Palestinian genocide, even as we're fighting for justice here in America. So thank you so much, brother.
It's my pleasure. It's my absolute I can't even tell you. It's so rare to have a space where you could actually talk about this stuff without a 3-minute limit, or without the kind of even when they don't say this or don't say that, in the back of your mind, you can't, and so you can make decisions on how to edit. I love the fact that you all are unfiltered, that you ask such great questions, and that's all anchored in a commitment to justice and love. That for me is everything.
Well, thank you, brother. Thank you so much, man.
Well, thank you so much for being on today. If you all want to find me, I am at LaKesha Womack on all social media, and we would love to have you all come back for our next episode, where you all know we will have the Reverend William Lamar IV, who will be talking about how they defeated the Proud Boys and strategies for countering extremism in our community. So we'll see you for our next show. Thanks again for tuning in.